Netflix is buying Warner Brothers. That is news that has rocked the industry, that has shaken Hollywood, and has everyone reeling. This is The Last Picture Show with Raheem Khan. What to make of this news? Because there's a lot to unpack here. There is a lot to, sort of industry insiders, business analysts, people with an eye on the industry, of course, are going to be talking about this for a long time to come. Here we are, myself, going to give my 2 cents on it, because what this now presents is something that could potentially change the industry altogether. And I guess rightly so, maybe justifiably even, you have many up in arms. Okay, so Netflix is sort of a household name now. I mean, everyone having moved on from what's it called traditional television, jumped onto the streaming platforms, and chief among them, I think sort of preeminent among them, is Netflix. I mean, sort of when it becomes a part of what's it called, parlance, Netflix and chill. When it becomes a part of language, then, sort of it's achieved something that sort of like, prestige channels, something like HBO and Discovery and whatnot, just haven't, been able to do. Disney, of course, is there, but I mean, sort of, it's not used. There's no phraseology around the word. I mean, you're never going to say Disney and chill. It's Netflix and chill. So, I mean, within the span of like 25 years, I mean, if you go back to the very start of it, Netflix was essentially, Blockbuster, but sort of an online version where you were just renting out, DVDs and whatnot. And Ted Sandros, the co-founder, I think had, here was somebody who definitely had aspirations, had ambition. And he wanted to sort of, initially, as this is very well known, when they did start their streaming platform and they were, doling out, buckets of money to just get, content from everyone. HBO famously held out. They didn't want to be on the platform. And sort of I wouldn't say it's understandable why HBO wouldn't want to do that, because at the time, of course, there was no plans to launch their own streaming service, HBO Max. But I mean, one can easily, it's very easy to understand why you would want HBO in your roster, because the thing is, again, if anyone was able to establish or even create that niche of prestige TV, it was HBO, with shows like, The Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, The Wire, Game of Thrones, Succession. I mean, they are it. Not to say that others, even Netflix themselves, have not been capable of achieving what HBO has done. But I mean, sort of HBO is that sort of gold standard. So, with HBO always holding out, it's now, I don't know, I mean, is it poetic justice? Is it irony? Is it revenge that sort of their biggest rival, Netflix, is now coming in to take them over? So in this purchase, which is, to the cool amount of 83 billion, Netflix will, of course, obtain Warner Brothers, HBO, and Discovery, which potentially makes it even bigger than Disney. That's saying something, because here you now have a media, not even powerhouse, juggernaut. I mean, they are now going to have, besides their own considerable volume of content, all of the stuff that they already have, they will now have access to that entire library of Warner Brothers, Discovery, and HBO. What does this mean now, of course? Where are the criticisms? What are the reservations? And are there any even silver linings to any of this? So first of all, and this is a concern, of course, and that is consolidation. Because the thing is that when you have one, as I said, juggernaut that controls all of this stuff, it very easily leads to a monopoly, and monopolies are never good. At least that's what business school taught us all. Monopolies are never good. They're not good for a number of reasons. Number one, because the thing is that in this case, they get to dictate terms. I mean, when you have all of your DC, all of DC to call on. I mean, Superman, Batman, those are now Netflix properties. Well, not now. I will just sort of segue into this thing. Even though they've made the bid and it has been accepted, there are still, according to sort of the usual timelines on stuff like this, it's going to take at least 12 to 18 months for this to actually go through, because the thing is that this has to pass through the regulators, what's it called? The FCC and all of that stuff. America has its very, specific business rules. Then, of course, there's a potential, as I mentioned, there's that monopoly where we all famously remember, the antitrust case that was done against Microsoft back in the 90s. So, there is, something where the regulators may want to step in and sort of look into it. So there is all of that. So we're not going to see any immediate changes, but now I can come back to the monopoly part. They get to dictate terms, right? So the thing is that, and as we've seen in the past, Hollywood has had problems with the Writers Guild. You remember that strike back in 2023? Yeah, 2023. You had all of that stuff that sort of ground the, industry to a halt. So the thing is that if they are responsible for most of the content now in Hollywood, and they get to call the shots, that is potentially worrying for all of the creators, for the filmmakers, for the actors, for the writers, for the, people who are doing all of the, special effects. There's so many people who can be potentially affected, because the thing is that you honestly have a sort of a bipolar world in which on the one hand you will have Netflix and on the other hand you'll have Disney and all of the others. So it's going to be kind of lopsided. And then of course, when I say there's a monopoly, there's also going to be a monopoly that's of course the potential financial side of things, right? Because the thing is that are they going to mothball, HBO's own streaming service, the HBO Max thing? Are they going to do that? Is everything now going to be just dumped on to Netflix, right? And then this will maybe even force more people to say, okay, forget it. I don't need I don't want a Disney Plus subscription. I think Netflix is it, because this will cover at least 50-60% of everything that I'm potentially ever going to watch, right? So there's that side. And then, of course, there's going to be the thing where, as I just said, they're going to maybe, we do not know how they're going to operate, where maybe they're going to tell creators that, sort of this is the line, either you toe it or bye-bye. It is worrying. It is worrying. Then Netflix, yes, they've had successes, but they've had more failures. And that is because as a streaming platform, sort of trying to become a studio itself, it was making, let's put it, not even putting it politely, they made a lot of shit, right? There's a lot of stuff. They have whole libraries full of shit that nobody's ever going to watch again. And yet they spent quite a bit of money on it. So the fear is that, will this water down, HBO? What happens to the newly constituted DC studios? Is Netflix going to now come in and say, hey, we don't like James Gunn and Peter Safran. Get rid of these guys. Let's bring in Zack Snyder again. This is just a thought. Not that it's actually going to happen or not. So there's that. Of course, Ted Sandros has said in a couple of interviews that, I don't see any need to, as they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If there's, what's it called? If HBO is doing what HBO is doing, why? I mean, we don't need to rock the boat right now. Let it continue as is. The same goes for Warner Brothers, which then leads us. So that's what he said, at least, which then leads us to one of the major, I would say, sticking points from the industry. Netflix, at the end of the day, is a streaming platform. It does not, except for a handful of movies, theatrical releases. It just doesn't do it. I mean, maybe. Sort of like if it's like a particularly special movie, they'll say, okay, we'll give it a very limited theatrical run. But otherwise, it doesn't do that. Warner Brothers, of course, is a studio. And its model, of course, is quite the opposite in that they are, for however long they've been in existence, cinema-based. Everything is released in the theaters. And then, of course, it comes onto other media. That's now one of the, I would say, major concerns from the industry. Because the thing is that, and again, Sandros has been very candid about this. He's been very vocal in that sort of, he has said that theaters are an outdated idea. They're an outdated idea. And what's it called? People, this is, of course, his understanding of, or at least what he understands. He thinks, he has said that people just want to watch this stuff at home, right? That's what led, sort of, if we all go back to 2020 and the pandemic, we all remember that except for save Netflix and some very minor others, nobody else had streaming platforms. But because you couldn't actually go to the cinema to watch movies, everyone then, Disney Plus, HBO, all of these people then jumped on Amazon, jumped on the bandwagon. Not to say that Amazon was already there, Prime was there, Apple was there, and all of these guys. But they really pushed for streaming platforms. And yes, the industry has never been the same, but, you're not going to tell somebody like Christopher Nolan or Paul Thomas Anderson or other cinema purists who make movies for the screen, the big screen, to suddenly, say, what, this movie is now going to be streamed online, or, this is just going to be on like somebody's phone. Tell that to somebody like Tom Cruise, who stuck to his guns and refused to bow to Paramount, and, stalled the release of Top Gun Maverick for at least 2 years? Yeah, about 2 years. He's like, no, this movie was made for the cinema. It's going to be released in the cinema whenever that may be. And he came out on top. So let's see now how Netflix plans to play this, because, as I said, there is this concern that this move is potentially going to change the industry. There are, of course, some silver linings here. If there was no Netflix, we would have never had shows like Stranger Things. We would have never had shows like Squid Game. That's something that I think Hollywood tends to navel gaze a little too much. Of course, Hollywood is America. It's the American sort of, it's their industry. But Netflix has enabled so many industries around the world to put content out there for people like you and me to watch. South Korea was already a powerhouse when it came to, films and stuff. And, they were making all of those TV shows, but we weren't really getting access to them until the streaming platforms came out. And, of course, until Netflix. Squid Game would have never existed. That cultural phenomena that it is and it has become is thanks to a platform like Netflix. And there are so many other shows like that. Not, of course, in that same category. But I'm saying that sort of there are dark, we all remember that from Germany. Netflix. So Netflix, isn't entirely evil. But, there are, it has provided, again, as I said, a platform for so many. And it's a shame that us losers here in Pakistan and our industry, they are big fat losers, failing to sort of take advantage of this. India's done a great job, and sort of like, Pakistanis are always, you can always see it in like, top 10 films in Pakistan, top 10 shows in Pakistan. There's always like some Indian stuff there. We just never take advantage of that stuff. But that's Pakistan for you. I had thought that in telling the story, or at least commenting on Netflix tentative takeover of Warner Brothers, that I'd be able to release the episode sooner than I had thought, sort of to come hot on the heels of that story. But as this is a developing story, there seems to be much more is afoot. We now have learned that there is a potential takeover bid by Paramount to pay almost $100 billion in cash to acquire Warner Brothers. The bidding war has, of course, begun. But where I feel I must weigh in on this and come in on the side of Netflix is because Paramount, now under the aegis of the Ellisons, Larry Ellison, of course, and his son David, known Zionists, let me add, I feel that this, more so than Netflix, is more, it's far more worrying. Why? So let's a little context on this, of course. So recently we saw that in in David Ellison's acquiring of Paramount and of course CBS, we saw that particularly when it came to CBS, and of course this was at the height of the Gaza genocide, the purchase came along with certain impositions. Those impositions were, number one, and most glaringly so, was the appointment of little known, let's be very honest, little known political commentator and writer Barry Weiss, another rabid Zionist, as the head of CBS News. Now, of course, CBS News along with NBC, ABC, these are, these, and then of course CNN, these are these legacy TV channels. News, sort of media houses in America. So for somebody like Barry Weiss, whose credentials leave much to be desired, to be appointed as the head of news, everyone, both, for example, critics of Zionists and Israel, both as well as people keeping an eye on the industry, as well as people who don't even care a fig for what's going on in the Middle East, but who are just generally concerned for sort of how sort of newsrooms are being run and how sort of, these corporate takeovers are watering down sort of the integrity and standards of journalism. This was very, very alarming, because here is a woman who wrote, I'm not sure how long she was sort of a contributor to the New York Times, but she was there for again, I can't recall how long she was there for, but there she was. And then she left in very dramatic fashion to go on to launch her own independent news, like YouTube channel, alternate media type thing called The Free Press, which compared to all of these others, like sort of The Young Turks and Breaking Points and all of these others, barely registered. I remember this was Tim Dillon, the comedian, who really laid into somebody like Barry Weiss, saying that somebody who got, 7,000 or 8,000 views on her podcasts or on her shows on the Free Press was suddenly, the Free Press, which was acquired by the Ellisons, David Ellison, it was valued at, a couple of, I can't even remember that figure because it was so, sort of disproportionate to the actual worth and quality of what the free press was. That everyone was just shocked. They were aghast. How could this happen? But it was very clear that this was less about this woman's credentials, less about her experience, or even her sort of storied career. It was more about appointing someone who was in lockstep with the ideology of the Ellisons themselves, Zionists, which they found perfectly aligned with a rabid Zionist like Barry Weiss. Of course, Barry Weiss's Free Press is famous for putting out that article that essentially said that at the height of the famine in Gaza, when pictures were released of those starving, emaciated children, that her Free Press contended that it was a publicity stunt. These were pictures that were pushed by Hamas, and that the children in question, who were, and I've said this here before on the Strangers over on our show Systematic, who looked like the forebears of so many in Israel in the concentration camps, that it wasn't due to the famine that they looked that way, it was due to pre-existing conditions. Of course, by all standards, moral or journalistic, the article was resoundingly thumped and condemned, but that it did not stop, the Ellisons from handing over CBS to Barry Weiss. And of course, since Barry Weiss has come in, there have been considerable changes at CBS, and we have yet to see the dust settle. Now, we can go back to Paramount's attempts to take over Warner Brothers. Of course, number one, those same critics in the industry who said that this is another step towards monopolization, whereas Netflix will now, of course, own Warner Brothers, HBO, Discovery, and all of that stuff. I don't see them up in arms with Paramount doing the same, because again, Paramount and Warner Brothers are essentially competitors. So for Paramount to step in and acquire Warner Brothers, HBO, and Discovery, it is essentially more. It's even more. These are two, powerhouses in the industry coming together, if it does come through. And again, it's just going to be monopoly. The other sort of criticism leveled at sort of Netflix's takeover is that sort of Netflix will, maybe, because of Netflix's own somewhat poor standard, they will bring down the quality of of what Warner Brothers, which of course has already been doing a great job at that. But like, for example, what it's been doing with HBO, and then of course, that Netflix being a streaming platform will favor that to theatrical releases, whereas Paramount, Paramount being of course a traditional studio, will stick to that model. Listen, let's cut through all of that bullshit. First of all, it is not a good idea, because the thing is that first, if we are going to simply argue on the fact of having one media house, one sort of juggernaut acquire another, it leads to monopoly, right? That's never a good thing. It's not a good thing for creators. It's not a good thing for business. It's not a good thing for anyone. So whether Netflix takes it or whether Paramount takes it, it's not a good thing either way. But of course, Warner Brothers is in sort of financial doldrums. That's number one. Number two, we know where their loyalties lie, the Ellisons. So, and we know that ever since the ceasefire, the Israelis and their Hasbara have been very keen, and they've been sort of very vocal about this as well, that they must attempt to clean up, rehabilitate, Israel's image. And of course, when you have the likes of Paramount, CBS, and potentially Warner Brothers, HBO, Discovery, all of these, I mean, it's going to be really easy to do so. There's another thing which I find somewhat saddening, somewhat disappointing, in that this bid by Paramount is not just Paramount alone. I think that sort of in that $100 billion that they have proffered, I think about 25 or 28 of that is from the Ellison's own kitty. The rest comes from various sources. One source is the Affinity Group, if I'm not mistaken, which is run by Jared Kushner. So you kind of have Trump kind of weighing in on this. He has spoken about this, not, sort of with Affinity Group or Kushner or Paramount or Netflix, because he did meet with Ted Sarandos, the CEO of Netflix. So he's known for playing sides off one another. So we don't know where he stands, but he has said that he will weigh in on this because this is a watershed moment for the industry. So you have Kushner there, but then you also have the sovereign wealth funds of 3 Middle Eastern countries also pitching in on this: the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. So the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia are chipping in with known Zionists to purchase Warner Brothers. We've always kind of known where Saudi Arabia and the UAE, how they've felt about Palestine, UAE has what's it called direct diplomatic relations. They've normalized relations with them. I think the Saudis would want it. I think if, of course, what happened in Gaza did not happen in Gaza, they would have signed the Abraham Accords, or whatever the Israelis are calling it nowadays. They would have signed that ages ago. But it is sad, it is disappointing to see that despite the fact that now, here we are, 2 years after this, having witnessed with our own eyes this genocide and this continuing bloodbath in the West Bank and in Gaza, because of course there is no ceasefire. Palestinians are being killed every day. The Israelis are bombing, there are ceasefire violations every single day. So it's disappointing to see them backing this bid. Creatively, I don't know with whom Warner Brothers will best be served. Because on the one hand, we know Netflix. Even though I tend to favor them, because I made the argument in the earlier part of this comment, that sort of thanks to Netflix, we have been able to sort of experience, TV shows and films from all over the world. That's not, for example, a track record that Paramount has. And even though Paramount has signed, I know that they firmly have Tom Cruise on board. So, there's going to be a Top Gun 3. It's in the works. He's signed on for that. And there's so much more. I don't know who to call it for, who's the right decision, creatively speaking. Otherwise, to hell with Paramount. I have no love for them. I hope, Netflix prevails.